The stone won't fall until the podcast of the dragon comes to your device. Hey everybody, my name is Morgan. You might know me as the Grey Warder on Twitter and Discord. Welcome to episode 3 of Podcast of the Dragon. I was trying to come up with a clever way to lead into an episode about Perrin as we take the first leg of our journey on his emo train. But I got distracted because I started imagining him wearing eyeliner and black nail polish, and then the vision expanded to include a tight black t-shirt and shiny black leather pants, and he kind of started to look vaguely like Robert Smith, and I knew it was hopeless. So we'll just have to say that this is the best I can manage and start the episode. In a game of fuck, marry, kill with our 3 ta'veren, I'd kill Perrin. I like him a lot, actually. I especially like him a lot pre-Figeel, and plenty of the issues that I do have with him actually revolve around her, though they are as much for him taking responsibility for her emotions as they are for him putting up with her bullshit. In the beginning, before she comes into the picture, in the early books, I find him incredibly appealing. There's just an earnestness to him. He has a genuine sweetness in his desire to placate everyone, to be a peacemaker and calm things down, to be careful and controlled and ordered, and just to not fuck anything up and to not hurt anyone or anything. I really identify with that. I identify with his logic and his deductive skills, and I even identify with the fact that despite having logic and deductive skills, he somehow manages to descend into acts of colossal dumbassery. Let's face it, deciding to go cross-country to Camelin with Egwene, that was a dumb idea, and it's the kind of idea that, at his age, not having read lots of terrible survival fiction where I knew that that wasn't a good idea, I might have come up with that idea. I identify with the fact that he's so self-conscious and that he's non-confrontational. People who aren't fond of Perrin complain that he overthinks everything, but being someone who's really indecisive, I feel that's so hard. Though, in fairness, I would not have waited inside of Shadowlogoth studying a gate for 5 minutes before deciding to leave because, there's a murder mist floating around. But otherwise, I think things to death, and I endlessly weigh the pros and cons because I'm terrified of making mistakes. Just like Perrin, I don't want to regret choices that I make. I really get him. I feel when people are impatient or annoyed with him for taking so long to come to terms with his wolf powers or for being mopey about them, they aren't really being fair. I don't think they really consider the events that surround his acquisition of his abilities before and after. Deciding to have 3 ta'veren was a great twist on the Chosen One trope. An ultimate good versus evil theme, that's pretty typical, Dark One, Champion of the Light. So RJ having this goal to make Rand less important so that other people can be heroes too, having the whole "it's never been about me" thing be part of the narrative from the very beginning was a really good idea. It just made everything fresh and new. I feel about Perrin's wolf powers in theory. It feels like RJ was struggling to come up with an ability for his 3rd ta'veren. I think that Matt's was the one that he was really interested in. It's complicated and really unique, and I can see Jordan being super into developing the story of Matt's combination of memories and luck and artifacts that give him this special ability, particularly since RJ was a military historian. So I could see him just getting down to the nitty gritty of finding out all of the ways in which Matt's abilities would come together and work to make him special. And with Rand, it's just bam, powerful magic user and chosen one. That's simple. And the third guy, racks his brains. He'll talk to wolves. And it's like, why wolves? Why them? Why are they sentient? Why are they the animals that get to have special brains and talk to people? Why do they wander Tel'aran Riyadh as animal dreamwalkers? Is it just because some counterpart to fight the Darkhounds was needed? It seems really random, and it doesn't feel like it came from a truly intentional, plotted out place. It feels like it was pulled out of the air and kind of backfilled because he needed something, and it was just kind of last minute, just, wolves. But once you take it out of theory and RJ puts it into practice, I like Perrin's ability a lot more, because Robert Jordan uses his wolf senses as a device to enhance Perrin's point of view, and it brings a whole new perspective. And at that point, it's like, why not wolves? Perrin's whole ability to smell emotions, beyond the fact that he takes responsibility for Fael's, which is one of the reasons why in a game of Fuck, Marry, Kill with R3 ta'veren, I'd kill Perrin, is unique. And it brings a subtlety and a depth to the scenes that he's in. Once you get into book 6, he starts making really good use of that ability. It makes his points of view fascinating and super nuanced. And since Jordan does point of view better than any author I have ever read, him adding that little twist to one of his ta'veren's points of view is great. It's really cool, and I have never seen anything like it before or since. I think that it's magnificent, and way to go with that. I don't feel like he fleshed out the background and the rules of talking to wolves well, but if this is supposed to be realistic, I think it probably makes sense that not a lot would be known about it, since it's old come again. There's not information about it in the White Tower, really. And so that means there's no way to have the kind of non-expository amount of information given to you that would give all the background. And having somebody show up that has all that information would be really dumb. So it makes sense that it wouldn't be filled out. And I think that that's okay. It's not really necessary. Perrin can talk to wolves, and it's cool enough, and it's a really useful ability. And it's helpful in the last battle when not only the wolves come to fight, but the Horn of Valyr calls wolves from Tel'aran Riyadh to fight Darkhounds, which I thought was impressive and really cool. And it ends up working really pretty well. And so in the end, I thought that, all right, why not wolves? It ended up being a pretty decent idea for something that I kind of thought was hella random and kind of tacked on, and bam, wolves. Well, okay, wolves, why not? Before I go any further, I'm going to give a quick summary of Perrin and Egwene's journey from Shadar Logoth to when they're captured by the White Cloaks. About 2 weeks pass from when they flee and get across the RNL to when they encounter the White Cloaks in the steading. And I'm using our 7-day week rather than the Randland 10-day week because that's just easier and less confusing. We know it's 2 weeks because there's a full moon as Perrin and Egwene search for a place to hide and find their way into the shelter of Hawkwing's statue's hand while the White Cloaks are searching, and there was no moon on the night that they fled Shadar Logoth, so 2 weeks there. We know they travel alone for at least 3 or 4 days, because 3 days are mentioned, and they see ruins twice, and Egwene complains of nightmares to Perrin after each one, so they see ruins on 2 different days. 3 days if they saw them back to back, 4 if there was a day between. When they meet up with Elias, he says he's been following them for 2 days, so my guess is that they traveled alone for 4 days, where they were pretty damn hungry. And then they meet up with him, and they travel with him for 3 stated days before they join up with the traveling people. So that would mean that they spent a week traveling with the traveling people, and then they leave one morning, and then they spent a horrible experience running between the sweeps of ravens, and that evening they barely reach the steading, and that culminates in Perrin killing the White Cloaks, and that's all in a single day, leaving the traveling people running from the ravens, hitting the steading, killing the White Cloaks. When people get frustrated that it takes Perrin so long to accept his powers, I don't think they take into account a number of things. Perrin is the most conservative of the Emmonsfield Five. He's the least happy about leaving home. He's the one who most wants to go back. He's the one who ends up going back. His introduction to the wolves was sandwiched between 2 terrible traumas. Fleeing an awful, horrible murder city on a night when he's nearly killed multiple times. He's separated from the party. He barely gets across the river. And then he and Egwene are alone after, and then on the other end, he ends up killing 2 people. When I say Perrin's the most conservative, I have to stop because I see conservative, and because I'm an American, in America we see conservative, and we immediately think batshit crazy because I live in a batshit crazy country. But I know when I'm thinking conservative, it's more that he's set in his ways. He prefers the norms of the 2 rivers. He likes everything just so. He's not really interested in having his horizons expanded. And it just takes him the longest to open his mind. He and Nynaeve are the least open-minded. But he's also the gentlest. He doesn't want to cause hurt. He's the kind of person, if he hurts somebody's feelings, he's fucked up about it for days. He's the kind of person he'd be sick if he couldn't make something right with someone, which is another reason I really strongly identify with him. Perrin is an incredibly mindfully careful person who lost control and killed 2 people. And that loss of control is terrifying, and that makes it so hard to come to terms with his abilities. It's one thing to choose to fight White Cloaks in that moment and choose to kill, but to be so overcome that you lose control and kill. He's still responsible for his action, even though those actions were in the moment beyond his volition. And so that combination of responsibility while not making a conscious choice, that's terrifying. And if I were in his shoes, I would not be particularly enamored of my wolf powers. And it would take me a really long time to get past that. It's Perrin's way of being tainted. Archie doesn't just only have 3 ta'veren. He makes it so that his chosen one doesn't stand alone in being tainted. All 3 of the boys are made dirty in some way. There's Saidin for Rand, so he spends many books channeling through the taint, and even once he's cleansed it, there's just this permanent effect, so that even when it's clean, the madness has left him with a dirty feel. There's the dagger for Matt, which also has, in a sense, the permanent effect, because it robs him of so many memories that it leads him along a path where he ends up choosing to go through the 2 separate redstone door-frame ter'angreal, where the Aelfin and the Eilfin search through his feelings and sensations, leaving him feeling skin-crawlingly dirty, and he makes a dirty deal with them, and afterward they're stuck into his head, and his head is also filled with all of these memories, a lot of which are not only memories of soldiering in battle, but endless memories of dying. One of the things that I think a lot of people don't consider about Matt, because he's a happy-go-lucky character, is that he has endless traumatic memories, traumatic experiences of dying, which is really fucked up. Perrin's taintedness is from the wolves, and he feels tainted by them even before he kills someone, which you see in the scene where they're running from the ravens, and they get a sending from the wolves saying that there's another flock coming up from behind. Moving in a stumbling trot, Perrin exchanged a glance with Elias. The man's yellow eyes were expressionless, but he knew. He said nothing, just watched Perrin and waited, all the while maintaining that effortless lope. Waiting for me to admit I feel the wolves. Ravens, Perrin panted reluctantly. Behind us. He was right, Egwene breathed. You can talk to them. Perrin's feet felt like lumps of iron on the ends of wooden posts, but he tried to make them move faster. If he could outrun their eyes, outrun the ravens, outrun the wolves, but above all Egwene's eyes that knew him now for what he was. What are you? Tainted, the light blind me. Cursed. Perrin, along with all the other things that he's self-conscious about, all the other things that he worries about, Perrin is terrified of being judged. And I feel that so hard too. People say that in an adventure story, it's a mistake to split the party, but I think that it makes a lot of sense in this one. Our young people need time to stretch their wings and struggle and grow, where the guides that they have are, for lack of a better term, guidey guides like Tom and Elias, rather than control freak guides like Moiraine and Nynaeve. Robert Jordan's choice of who went with whom was likely dictated by 3 different things. For one thing, under no circumstances can Rand and Egwene go together. Secondly, Nynaeve has to be in a position where her power dynamic is weak. To take away her authority and relegate her to a more childlike position. Because she's older and she was in charge in her village and stuff, she needs to be humbled in order to kind of prepare her to deal with the world, because she's really ignorant, and also because she needs to have kind of a coming of age story as well. She is part of a group of people from a backward village, and she just does not know enough, and she is young enough and frankly immature enough that she has to have that same journey as the other people, and hers is more difficult because she is older. But she has to have that experience because she has to be able to navigate through the world, and she's going to have to be able to get to the point where, in a relatively short amount of time, she's going to have to be able to deal with Egwene, who will soon surpass her in strength of will, force of personality, and, frankly, maturity. So she's put into a position where she is made to feel really small by traveling with Moiraine and Lon, whereas Lon's kind of on the sideline watching this sparring match where Moiraine isn't even sparring and Nynaeve is furious because she can't even get in a hit. I'm going to have an empathy building exercise with Nynaeve, probably a whole episode dedicated to it, because I know that Moiraine is being a dick to her, but Nynaeve deserves it. If you can spin someone up just by not rising to their bait, that's on them. If all it takes to press someone's buttons is to be the bigger person, it's a paradox of being petty while being dignified, because you know that your lack of being fazed infuriates the other person, and they know that you know, and they know that you think they're amusing and silly, and they hate it. It's kind of like when a child is furious because you don't take them seriously. And that's kind of the dynamic that Moiraine and Nynaeve are in. And then Moraine aggravates her further with the occasional patronizing smile, and she does it on purpose, knowing that it will further upset her. And I don't know that I could resist it either, because I'm an asshole, and because Nynaeve's a bully, and she has a lot of my least favorite traits in people. She is not self-aware. She doesn't take responsibility for her feelings. She can't admit when she's wrong. And I struggle with her. I know that when I go back, because I will do an episode where I take time to build empathy for her, because there are so many things that are great about her. And my goal with this podcast is to try to have more empathy for everyone in the series. I might feel very differently because I know she's in this powerless situation and she's very frustrated and frightened. But as it is, because she's not my favorite, I totally understand why Moraine does what she does. And frankly, I would probably do it in her shoes too, because it's effortless. I mean, when you're not actually doing anything except not being mad when someone wants you to be mad at them, I mean, technically that's on them at that point. The third thing dictating the division of the party is that Rand, as the strongest ta'veren, will have the best chance of resisting the dagger. So he has to be the one that goes with Mat. And so that incidentally leaves Egwene, who is the most open-minded of all of them, which is true even when she's spouting stereotypes about Tinkers being thieves. And to be fair, when she's called out on it, she's embarrassed, and she learns. Egwene always learns. So she's guaranteed to be most accepting of Perrin. And she's not super freaked out when she learns about the talking to the wolves. The wolves themselves freak her out, but when she hears about this skill of, whoa, people can talk to wolves, she's immediately like, can you teach us? Like, she wants to learn how to do it too. I'm glad Robert Jordan had Perrin and Egwene go together. Their scenes are some of my favorite in the whole book, and actually in the entire series. I really like their friendship. They go through really difficult and formative stuff, and they have not just a trauma bond, but a true closeness from their shared dream-walking ability, and from just, I think that they probably were pretty close friends before. You know, they lived together in Emmons Field. I think that they were probably pretty close just proximity-wise. I think the Forge was pretty close to the inn. And I think that they just had a lot of interactions throughout the course of growing up. Once Perrin moved to the village and became Master Lewin's apprentice when he turned 11 or 12. And so seeing them together in this short 2-week span of time, it's nice. And I'm really glad that he put the two of them together. And I really wish we got more of them together. After Eye of the World, we never get another point of view from one of them with the other, except for a couple of encounters in Teleron Riyadh when they're first learning, and in Towers of Midnight when he tells her it's just a weave when balefire gets shot at him and he manages to duck it because it's just a weave, and he thinks of it as that, and then that makes it so. And by then it's Brandon Sanderson writing it, and while I think Brandon Sanderson did a really good job with a lot of the characters, and I actually think he did an outstanding job writing both Perrin and Egwene. And from what I've read, actually, Robert Jordan did a lot of Egwene's story that's in the last 3 books. It's just not the same. But after the Eye of the World, while Perrin and Egwene are in the same places sometimes, at Faldara, in the Stone of Tyr, any of the scenes they might be in together are always from someone else's point of view. So you never see one of them thinking or having an inner narrative about the other. And I want more with them. The scene where he and Egwene are hiding from the White Cloaks and sheltering in Hawkwing's hand is utterly heartbreaking to me. He saw Egwene nod, but in the dark she didn't realize it. "We'll be all right, Perrin." "Light," he thought wonderingly. "She's trying to comfort me." The shouts went on and on. Small knots of torches moved in the distance, flickering points of light in the darkness. "Perrin," Egwene said softly, "will you dance with me at Sunday, if we're home by then?" His shoulders shook. He made no sound, and he did not know if he was laughing or crying. "I will. I promise." Against his will, his hands tightened on the axe, reminding him that he still held it. His voice dropped to a whisper. "I promise," he said again, and hoped. That scene absolutely kills me. I could see the two of them having a real love. Most of the loves in the story aren't believable, though that doesn't mean that I don't think the relationships are. I've said before that I think that Robert Jordan envisions most of his characters as soldiers, and a lot of them are very young. And lots of young soldiers get married in ill-considered relationships. They'll marry whoever they're dating at the time. You do it so that you can stay together. Your spouse ends up being a dependent, and you get extra money, and they can move on to the base with you. So it's not uncommon for young people in the military to just hook up with whoever and get married and go off. And so I don't think that most of the relationships are really that unbelievable in the story. They just don't have a ton of depth, and the love inside them is not particularly believable because there's a difference. But I try not to judge the relationships too much because it's not super unbelievable that with the world ending, people would just take what they could get. And so I just imagine these people hooking up with whoever because it's like, okay, well, this person will do since we don't have a lot of time. I honestly don't think Robert Jordan wanted to have romances, but he got told that he had to have them because it was the 90s and it was expected. And as a 90s kid, that's true. If you were reading a story like this and there wasn't a romance in it, it would have seemed incomplete. You'd be reading a story and you'd be wondering, so when are the characters going to meet whoever they're going to hook up with? It just was something that you expected, and it had to be there, and if it wasn't, you'd just be like, what the fuck? But I don't think RJ was interested in them, and so he just kind of dialed it in when he wrote them. And I don't think he ever would have put any of the Two Rivers people together because he figured if he had to write romances, he might as well do something political with them, and so he made them have strategic marriages where all of their relationships that they have some manner of political purpose. Like even Rand's relationship with Min serves a purpose. Her abilities are useful to him, and at the end, she's able to even give him a tie to the Shanshan Empress and make her more amenable. So, while RJ would never have put Perrin and Egwene together, I could see them together really loving each other. And this despite the fact that he's much less open-minded than she is. She would force him to grow, not in like a bitchy browbeating way where she would manipulate him into it, but just in a this is how it needs to be kind of practical way that would give him the room to do it and the time and the chance, and he would be steady stable, reliable, mature, and he would keep his word. And I think that they would be really good together. And so they're seen while they're sheltering in Hawkwing's hand always kind of breaks my heart a little bit and gets me in the feels. When Perrin comes into his powers, he's coping with post-Shatter Logoth trauma, and he's already changed a bunch from the calm, gentle, peaceful boy that he was. When he, Elias, and Egwene begin staying with the Tinkers, and they incidentally start relaxing a little, which tends to be when you've experienced a trauma. Once you kind of let your guard down a bit, shit starts coming up. He shows classic signs of PTSD. He's feeling anxiety and anger among the Tinkers because he fears bringing them harm. Perrin could not make himself relax. At night he wandered among the rainbow wagons, worrying, as much because no one else seemed to see anything to worry about as for any other reason. The Tuathans sang and danced, cooked and ate around their campfires, fruits and nuts, berries and vegetables. They ate no meat, and went about a myriad of domestic chores as if they had not a care in the world. The children ran and played everywhere, hide and seek among the wagons, climbing in the trees around the camp, laughing and rolling on the ground with the dogs, not a care in the world for anyone. Watching them, he itched to get away. Go, before we bring the hunters down on them. They took us in, and we repay their kindness by endangering them. At least they have reason to be light-hearted. Nothing is hunting them, but the rest of us. His feelings about the Tinkers are conflicted. You get the feeling that he's envious a bit, and I think it's because if he came across them before winter night, he probably could have been seduced by the way of the leaf. He's got the kind of personality, he's peaceful and deliberate and gentle, and he's the kind of person who would really do well in a situation where everybody was just chill and relaxed. He could just do his blacksmithing work during the day and dance at night and be happy with people and just be ultimately peaceful, because he just wants everybody to be relaxed and laid back, and it's really tragic for him. And he's also angry at their lack of realism. He knows from the things that he's seen that they aren't realistic. Sometimes he wanted to shout at them. There were Trollocs in the world, and Fades. There were those who would cut down every leaf. The Dark One was out there, and the way of the leaf would burn in Baalzamon's eyes. He's terrified that they will bring harm down on people who have a kindness and purity and joy that he can no longer lay claim to. And in the meantime, as he's feeling anxiety and anger and having classic PTSD symptoms, his wolf senses are getting stronger and stronger. He was aware of the wolves, though, when he was awake. They kept their distance from the camp and from the caravan on the move, but he always knew where they were. He could feel their contempt for the dogs guarding the Tuatha, noisy beasts who had forgotten what their jaws were for, had forgotten the taste of warm blood. They might frighten humans, but they would slink away on their bellies if the pack ever came. Each day his awareness was sharper, more clear. They stay with the Tinkers for about a week, and the whole time Perrin is just desperate to leave because he's fearful of bringing them harm. And Elias is like, no, dude, we need to stay. I've just got a feeling that we should stay. I've had feelings like this before. They've saved my life. Let's just, hang on. You could fucking take off if you want to, but I'm staying here. And so they stay until the day that Perrin has a terrible dream. It was his first Baalzamon dream in a long time. The wolves have been protecting his dreams, but it's not a perfect protection because he's resistant to them. And in his dream, Balsamon burns a wolf, and then Perrin thinks that he wakes up and there's a raven on his chest, and it stabs out his eye with a beak, and then he wakes up for real. And all the wolves are howling, and there's just this feel in the air, and the Tinkers are like, okay, so we're going to take off this way today, and Elias is like, okay, well, we're going to peace out. So they leave, and there's just this sense because something is wrong, and Elias doesn't know what it is, and so rather than just traveling in a straightforward fashion, he's like zigzagging around the hills and following the contours, and when they have to go over the hills, kind of crawling up on his belly and checking everything out. And they finally realize that what's going on is that there are ravens, giant flocks of ravens. The scene with the ravens is so iconic for me as far as being one of the most memorable scenes in the Eye of the World. In its own way, it is as tense and awful as the scene with the Trollocs on the Camelin Road. It's almost worse, honestly, because ravens are mindless and they're just swarming over everything and they're mowing everything down, just devouring the animals and leaving like bloody lumps of fur, and it's just stressful and exhausting because they're having to stop and start and they're just running, and Elias is yelling at them, trying to get them to go faster. Early on, Elias mentions that he knows a place if they can get there by dark, but in the tenseness and the immediacy of the scene, everybody forgets about it, including the reader, so that you think that they're doomed. Perrin is seeing from the wolf's point of view, so he knows there are ravens coming from behind. And they're doing that stop and start, and they're basically following right on the tails of the ravens in front. And they know that if any of them look back, they're screwed. They'll see them, they'll come swarming down on them. They've had to kill a whole bunch of stragglers with their slings. He's working out in his head the picture the wolves are giving him of the pursuing ravens, trying to figure out, are they going to make it? And he knows that they aren't going to have enough time, that they'll be overrun before dark when the ravens would have gone to roost. In an hour, the ravens would be on them, maybe less. An hour, and it was a good 2 hours to sunset, at least 2 to full dark. We'll die with the setting sun, he thought, staggering as he ran. Slaughtered like the fox. He fingered his axe, then moved to his sling. That would be more use. Not enough, though. Not against 100 ravens, 100 darting targets, 100 stabbing beaks. It's your turn to ride, Perrin, Egwene said tiredly. In a bit, he panted. I'm good for miles yet. She nodded and stayed in the saddle. She is tired. Tell her, or let her think we still have a chance to escape. An hour of hope, even if it is desperate, or an hour of despair. What would it take for you to kill a friend? Robert Jordan was a soldier. I've seen plenty of movies about the Vietnam War. I've seen movies about a lot of wars. I've read a decent number of books, and so I've seen and read about scenes where people were horribly wounded, and they were either going to die, or they were disfigured in a way where they didn't want to live, and so they begged to be killed, and their buddy who's doing triage will do them a solid and overdose them on morphine. I've seen documentaries about the World War I Battle of Passchendaele, which took place in low-lying land where the shelling had obliterated the drainage systems, and then Ypres experienced the worst torrential rain in 30 years, and shell craters that people used for shelter became liquid clay death traps. Men would fall in, and the weight of their equipment would create suction, and it was impossible to get them out. And men would shoot their friends so they wouldn't have to suffer the slow agony of sinking into and drowning in mud. Men would beg to be shot so they didn't have to die that horrible slow death of drowning. And their friends, if they were courageous enough and kind, would oblige. Perrin knows that they'll be overrun. Perrin looked at Egwene again and blinked away hot tears. He touched his axe and wondered if he had the courage. In the last minutes, when the ravens descended on them, when all hope was gone, would he have the courage to spare her the death the fox had died? Light make me strong. I've discussed this scene, and I've heard discussions of it. I've heard different opinions about it. Some people think that Perrin's mind going to this place is crazy. Maybe it's just the stuff that I've studied, or the fact that I torment myself with empathy exercises and imagine myself in really fucked up situations and wonder what I would do and think really dark thoughts about it. But I think it's utterly logical, and I really get it, but it's so horrible. Because overdosing someone on morphine when you're in the jungle, and I don't know if RJ had to do that to a friend. I wonder if that's why he put this scene in the book. That's hard in the sense that you're killing your friend, but it's really simple in the sense that you're just giving them an extra cigarette, and it's just like, morphine, the drug's so nice, you inject it twice. Shooting a friend is terrible, but there's separation with a gun. You point and you shoot, you pull the trigger, and there's a distance between you and the person you're shooting. So it's fucked up because that person is your friend. It's bad, but nothing to taking an axe and cutting your friend down to spare her a horrible death. The impulse is a kind one, but Perrin punishes himself for thinking it. When they get to the steading and they go further in and they reach the pond and they're drinking water, Egwene is so happy and she's relieved. She's smiling and she's splashing water at Perrin. Perrin's eyes grew sober. She frowned and opened her mouth, but he stuck his face back in the water. No questions. Not now. No explanations. Not ever. But a small voice taunted him. But you would have done it, wouldn't you? And then a little further on. Not quite an hour till dark. If not for the steading, all of you would be dead now. Would you have saved her? Would you have cut her down like so many bushes? Bushes don't bleed, do they? Or scream and look you in your eyes and ask why? Perrin drew in on himself more. He could feel something laughing at him deep in the back of his mind. Something cruel. Not the dark one. He almost wished it was. Not the dark one. Himself. I can almost identify with that, too. The need to be mean to yourself about something that you feel shitty about even when you shouldn't. Because there's nothing wrong with what Perrin thought. And frankly, and you're welcome to disagree with me, but if they had been overrun by the ravens and he had killed Egwene, I think he would have been right to. And Elias certainly thinks so. As he says to him, "Do you hate the girl? Despise her? That's it. You were ready to kill her because you despise her, always dragging her feet, holding you back with her womanish ways." "Egwene never dragged her feet in her life," he protested. "She always does her share. I don't despise her. I love her." He glared at Elias, daring him to laugh. "Not like that. I mean, she isn't like a sister, but she and Rand..." Blood and ashes. If the ravens had caught us. If. I don't know. Yes, you do. If she had to choose her way of dying, which do you think she'd pick? One clean blow of your axe, or the way the animals we saw today died? I know which I'd take. I don't have any right to choose for her. You won't tell her, will you? About. His hands tightened on the axe haft. The muscles in his arms, corded, heavy muscles for his age, built by long hours swinging the hammer at Master Lewin's forge. Elias tries to shake some sense into him. What you thought wasn't wrong. Quit punishing yourself for having what amount to coldly logical but essentially merciful thoughts. But Perrin is kind of like Rand. He likes to punish himself. When he's at the pool looking at his axe, and he says he hates it, and he goes to throw it away. And he hates it, but at that moment, he's only maybe used it to kill Trollocs, and we don't even know if he's done that. He was in the battle before Shatter Logoth, but we don't know if he actually successfully killed a Trolloc with it. He's never hurt anybody else with it. He doesn't hurt anybody else with it for another hour. So he hates it because he thought to use it for something that's in a twisted, fucked up way good. He hates it because he thought to use it for something that's essentially a kindness. But because it's a kindness that's so fucked up because he was in a fucked up situation, he's sickened with himself. When he finally does throw it away, it isn't even because, as Elias says, as long as you hate using it, you will use it more wisely than most men would. Wait. If ever you don't hate it any longer, then will be the time to throw it as far as you can and run the other way. In Crossroads of Twilight, when he throws it away, it's not that he doesn't hate it. It's what he's willing to do with it. He crosses a line. It's not just that he's willing to kill with it. It's not that he'd use it to kill a friend as an act of kindness. It's that he coldly and calculatingly uses it not just to cut off someone's hand, but to do it as an act of psychological pressure, knowing exactly what it would take to make an Aielman talk, using his understanding of Aiel culture and shame and Ji'ito, using the fact that he has Aes Sedai and can have them heal someone so that they will not die and not be in pain, so that he can force someone to have to face having their hands and feet cut off and the fear of being left to beg. The fact that he's willing to do that to further his ends lets him know that it's time to be rid of it, because that line is a line too far. And that's what it takes to make him throw it away. I think the fact that it's White Cloaks that he kills is the only reason Perrin can even live with himself. The loss of control is so terrifying, and I bet he tortured himself after it with all kinds of eventualities. He attacked the White Cloaks because they killed Hopper. Pain filled Perrin, and he screamed, a wordless scream that had something of a wolf's cry in it. Without thinking, he leaped forward, still screaming. All thought was gone. The horsemen had bunched too much to be able to use their lances, and the axe was a feather in his hands, one huge wolf's tooth of steel. Something crashed into his head, and as he fell, he did not know if it was Hopper or himself who died. It would be hard enough to make the conscious choice to kill someone. Would the Perrin in The Eye of the World make that choice? I don't even know that he would. Perrin a year from now? That Perrin lets an Aielman out of a cage and kills a whole bunch of White Cloaks and doesn't give a fuck. But Perrin in The Eye of the World, I could see him torturing himself, imagining, what if a farmer saw Hopper on the edge of his field and shot him with an arrow. Would I have murdered that farmer? You know, just imagining all of these different eventualities that might have ended with him completely losing control, with wolves just taking him over and losing himself and killing someone. Someone far less deserving of being killed than a white cloak. I can understand why coming into his wolf powers isn't a happy process. And you have to think also, at this time, they don't know who it is that the Dark One is looking for, and they don't know why. Moraine doesn't tell them why. She wouldn't tell them why, because they would just run. You'd run. After the Shatter Logoth battle, because Matt is shouting in the Old Tongue, they thought that it might be him. You know, Rand feels ashamed because he thinks with relief, oh, well, maybe it's Matt, you know, all that old blood come again, and he sees that guilty look on Perrin's face and knows that he's thinking the same thing. Having these powers manifest makes Perrin fearful, not only that it might be the Dark One's touch making him have these powers, because wolves are something he views negatively. He lives in a rural area where wolves kill sheep and are considered bad. They're killed by farmers because they kill livestock and they even kill people sometimes. So it's not like he associates anything positive with them. So he's wondering, do these powers come from the Dark One, or do they mean that I'm the one the Dark One is looking for? Neither is particularly promising. You also have to think that this happens shortly after the worst night of his entire life. Shatter Logoth was singularly awful, as I discussed in depth last episode. It was fucked up and horrible, and having to deal with the trauma of that afterward, and it's discussed somewhat as they're traveling before they join up with Elias. I didn't go over it, but they do talk about it a little bit. You know, they're fucked up by it. In the aftermath, it's apparent that he's suffering some post-traumatic stress. You know, it's shown with the Tinkers. He's anxious, he's angry, he's not doing so great. This night, I think, where he kills the White Cloaks, I think it probably supplants the night at Shatter Logoth as the worst night of his entire life. So, coming into his wolf powers is bookended by the two worst nights of his entire life. And then you add wolf powers, you know, adding these wolf powers into this whole mix of shitty nights and horrible situations and everything that's just gone fucking wrong over the last month. And then you have to think about, all it does is make Perrin even more different than he already is. And he doesn't want to be different. He's already different. He's already self-conscious about the fact that he's different. Perrin is really big, and he feels like he needs to be extra careful about it. He's always having to be very mindful because he doesn't want to hurt anybody or break anything. He thinks deliberately because his thought processes are logical and ordered, and he doesn't want to make any mistakes, and so he calculates everything and weighs everything, and he knows that that means people assume that he's dumb because he's also indecisive, and he's self-conscious about so much. Does he really need something else to be self-conscious about? You know, does he really need to be self-conscious about wolves? And then his eyes change too, and they turn yellow. He's got to be self-conscious about that. I mean, what the fuck? And then these powers sear themselves indelibly in his mind in this overwhelming negative association because he has an epic loss of control. The wolf takes over and two people end up dead. And it's like, here are powers I can't control. Here are powers that controlled me. Kind of like when a channeler blows someone up. Take it from someone who's bipolar. Not being able to control yourself is bad enough when you're hysterically crying because there are no clean forks. But at least no one's dead after those tears are done. So I'm going to give Perrin a pass for taking so long to come to terms with his abilities and for being so miserable about them and for going through a really long emo stage. He has a right to be upset about it. He's the kind of person who's miserable when he hurts people, even if those people are white cloaks, he has a right to be so fucked up about it. I don't understand why so many people say The Eye of the World is the most light-hearted Wheel of Time book. It is filled with horrifying moments. Lots of awful shit happens, and none of the characters have any power. None of them are good at fighting. None can really channel. They're all weak and squishy, and basically their only choice is to run. And everything is super scary and extra. It's fucked up. So much is fucked up. There's just a lot to deal with. So much awful stuff happens in this book, and nobody has any sense of power or potency. So I give Perrin a break. I think he's okay, at least for now. I have a problem with him later, being bipolar, if he were smelling all my crazy emotions and trying to react accordingly rather than just reacting to my actions. Well, that's why I'd kill Perrin in a game of fuck, marry, kill with R3 ta'veren, but that's later. And this is now, and for now, I'd just pat him on the shoulder. I'm just kidding, I'd nod from at least 6 feet away, and I'd let him know it's okay, and he can have as much time as he needs to get used to his ability. Because even if it's just in his own mind, it's his way of being tainted. All of the boys get to be tainted. Robert Jordan made sure Rand isn't the only one, because friends who are dirty together save the world? That sounds super kinky, but whatever. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Podcast of the Dragon. I'm looking forward to doing more explorations of individual characters. I actually really enjoyed doing that episode. It was a lot of fun. You can find me on Twitter at WarderGray. That's Gray with an E. The Watt Trivia Challenge is now called Watt Trivia and Games. The link to the Discord is at TriviaWatt on Twitter. I'm the High Inquisitor there, and if you go to the Discord, the Podcast of the Dragon has its own channel on the Discord. You can go, you can join one of the trivia teams, you can talk to me on that Discord channel. If you don't want to go to the Discord, but you want to talk to me, you have questions, constructive criticism, suggestions for future episodes, you can email me at podcastofthedragon@gmail.com. My music is by Kevin MacLeod. I'm the Grey Warder, and if I were Perrin, I would have hidden from the White Cloaks in Arthur Hawkwing's pants instead of his hand, because they never would have looked in there.